This is Harrods, a luxury department store in the middle of London. To most people, it looks completely British. The green awnings, the old building, the doormen, the wealthy shoppers walking out with paper bags. It feels like the kind of place that belongs to Britain's old upper class. But Harrods is not British owned. In 2010, it was sold to Qatar Holding, the investment arm of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund, in a deal reported to be worth around £1.5 billion. And once you notice that, London starts to look different, because Harrods is not the only one. Look across the city and you start seeing the same pattern. The Shard and the wider Shard Quarter, luxury hotels, office buildings, airport stakes, pieces of London that feel deeply British, but whose ownership can lead thousands of miles away to Doha. Qatar does not own London, to be clear, that would be too simple. But in some of the most valuable and symbolic parts of the city, Qatari money has become impossible to ignore. For centuries, London projected British power. It was the capital of empire, finance, monarchy, law, and trade. Its buildings told a story about who ruled, who owned, and who mattered. But in modern London, ownership is harder to see. The name on the front of the building may be British. The street may be British. The history may be British. But the money behind it may come from a sovereign wealth fund. It may pass through holding companies, lawyers, and asset managers. By the time you trace the paper trail, the owner is no longer a local family, a British company, or even a normal investor. It may be a state-backed investor. At first, this looks like a real estate story. Rich countries with oil and gas money buying safe assets in London. That is old, that is normal, that is almost boring. But the deeper you look, the more this stops being only about real estate. Gulf state-backed capital is buying into many of the systems that help give the West its power. Culture, sport, airports, gaming, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and the industries that will matter after oil. Let's start with London, because London is the cleanest example. It is old, wealthy, global, and obsessed with property. It is also one of the easiest places in the world for foreign capital to hide in plain sight. Qatar's rise in London was not random. It bought assets that carried status. Harrods was a symbol of British luxury. The Shard became a symbol of the modern skyline. Luxury hotels were pieces of the city's social map. These assets are not just places. They are signals. To a sovereign wealth fund, a landmark building can do several jobs at once. It can store national wealth. It can hold value outside the Gulf. It can generate income. It can give prestige. And it can place a small state inside the daily life of one of the world's most important capitals. This is the first rule of sovereign wealth. A building is never just a building. If a private billionaire buys a London tower, it is a rich person making an investment. But when a state-backed fund buys it, the meaning changes. The asset can still be commercial, legal, and profitable, but it can also become part of a national strategy. A normal investor wants a return. A sovereign wealth fund wants a return too, but it can also want influence, access, security, prestige, and survival. For many Gulf governments, the logic is simple. Oil and gas created their wealth. But oil and gas will not guarantee their future forever. Their old power came from what was buried underground, but the world is trying to move away from fossil fuels. Slowly, unevenly, and imperfectly, but clearly enough for Gulf leaders to plan around it. So, they are trying to turn temporary energy wealth into permanent financial power. Oil becomes money. money becomes assets, assets become influence, influence becomes protection. That is the machine. Now move from London to California, Redwood City. This is where Electronic Arts is headquartered. EA is one of the biggest names in Western gaming. Madden, The Sims, Battlefield, Apex Legends, EA Sports FC. For millions of people, EA is not just a company. It is a memory. It is childhood. It is sport. It is online life. It is the thing people play after school, after work, and on weekends. And that is why gaming matters. It is not just entertainment anymore. It is culture, it's data, it is payment systems, it's online communities, it's young people spending hundreds of hours inside digital worlds owned by private companies. Saudi Arabia knows this. For years, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, or PIF, built exposure to gaming. It created Savvy Gaming Group to grow Saudi Arabia's gaming and esports sector, and Savvy later announced a plan to invest about $37.8 billion into making the kingdom a global gaming hub. At first, these investments looked like minority positions, a way to profit, a way to diversify, a way to learn the industry. Then in 2025, the story became much bigger. EA announced a $55 billion agreement to be acquired by the consortium made up of PIF, Silver Lake, and Affinity Partners. If completed, EA would be taken private. Public shareholders would be paid out. The stock would disappear from public markets. The company said the deal includes about $36 billion in equity and $20 billion in debt financing committed by JP Morgan Chase. This is where ownership becomes more serious. Buying shares is one thing. Taking control is another. A minority investor can make money, but a controlling investor can change the board, the strategy, the pressure on workers, and the kind of products that survive. And the EA deal shows why the leveraged buyout matters. A leveraged buyout sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. Imagine someone wants to buy a mansion. Instead of paying for the whole thing with their own money, they borrow a huge amount from the bank. But after the deal is done, the debt does not really sit with the buyer. It sits with the mansion. The mansion now has to pay for the loan. That is basically how a leveraged buyout works. A buyer acquires a company using a mix of equity and borrowed money. After the deal closes, the company itself can carry a large part of the debt. The company's cash flow becomes part of the machine that pays the bill. In the EA deal, the debt is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It can change the financial pressure inside the company. Think about an animator at a game studio in Los Angeles. He thinks his job depends on whether the next game is good, whether the fans like it, whether it sells. But after a debt-heavy takeover, that's no longer the full story. His job can also become tied to interest rates, debt payments, refinancing costs, and cash flow targets. The game still has to be good, but it also has to feed the debt machine. When a company carries heavy debt, management can start looking for quick savings. Layoffs can become easier to justify, smaller studios can become vulnerable, risky projects can be canceled, creative experiments can be replaced by safer franchises. The company can become more focused on predictable cash. This is not always because the new owner hates creativity. Sometimes it is just math. Debt needs payment. Payment needs cash. Cash can lead to cuts. And when the company is part of a culture, the consequences are not only financial, they can affect what millions of people watch, play, and experience. To understand why Gulf states are doing this, you have to understand the fear underneath the strategy. The Gulf is rich because of oil and gas, but that wealth comes with a deadline. Not a clear deadline, not a date on a calendar, but a direction. The world is trying to use less fossil fuel. For decades, oil and gas built the modern Gulf. They paid for highways, airports, ports, airlines, skyscrapers, universities, and entire cities that seemed to rise out of the desert almost overnight. But the same resource that made these states powerful also made them vulnerable. If your country depends heavily on one export, and the world slowly moves away from that export, your future becomes a race against time. Saudi Arabia calls its plan Vision 2030. The UAE has built itself as a hub for aviation, finance, logistics, tourism, and technology. Qatar has used gas wealth to build global investments, media, influence, sport, and real estate. Different countries, different strategies, same basic goal: turn oil and gas wealth into something more permanent before the old model weakens. This is why sovereign wealth funds matter. They are not just investment funds, they are national insurance policies. For decades, much of this money moved quietly. Oil was sold, dollars came in. Those dollars flowed back into Western banks, Western bonds, Western companies, and Western real estate. This was called petrodollar recycling. The Gulf got stability, the West got liquidity. Everyone benefited. But then came 2008. The financial crisis changed the balance. Western banks were collapsing, credit markets were freezing, governments were panicking. Suddenly, many large financial institutions in the West needed capital. And the Gulf had cash. During the crisis, sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf and Asia became important sources of capital for major Western financial institutions. Qatar invested heavily in Barclays. Other sovereign funds took positions in banks and financial firms that were under serious pressure. These were not donations, they were investments, but they taught a powerful lesson. When the West is stable, it talks about regulation, transparency, and national security. But when the West is in crisis, it takes the money. After 2008, Gulf capital was no longer just a passive holder of Western assets. It could be a rescuer, a partner, a negotiator, and a source of power. But buying strategic assets is not simple. Western governments have rules. In the United States, for example, CFIUS reviews certain foreign investment and real estate transactions to judge their effect on national security. In Europe, governments have also become more alert to foreign ownership of sensitive infrastructure, energy, data, and technology. So if a foreign state walks directly into the West and tries to buy a sensitive company, regulators may stop it. That is the front door. And the front door is watched. So, sovereign capital often uses another path, the side door. The side door is not illegal. That is what makes it powerful. It looks professional. It uses major law firms, clean press releases. It uses private equity language, American and European partners. It uses words like consortium, co-investment, strategic partnership, long-term capital. It does not look like a foreign government buying influence. It looks like finance. Instead of acting alone, sovereign wealth funds often partner with respected Western institutions, private equity firms, asset managers, banks, former officials, investment platforms. These partners bring local knowledge. They structure the deal. They speak the language of regulators. They reduce political resistance. Most importantly, they give the deal a familiar face. The money may come from Riyadh, Doha, or Dubai, but the paperwork can come through New York, London, or Silicon Valley. Now, that does not mean every Western partner is controlled by Gulf states. These firms have their own motives. They want fees, access, deals, and proximity to huge pools of capital. But the effect is still clear. Sovereign money can become much easier to accept when it is wrapped in Western finance. That is why this strategy can be so effective. It does not need to smash through Western institutions. It can simply move through them. It can buy into them, partner with them, sponsor them, fund them, rescue them, and eventually make them harder to separate from. That is a quieter form of power, but it may be more durable than the loud kind. But money and lawyers are not enough. If you want lasting influence in the West, you need the public. And one of the fastest ways to reach the public is sport. In 2021, the PFI-led consortium bought an 80% stake in Newcastle United in a takeover worth about £300 million. And this is where the story becomes human. For years, many Newcastle fans felt trapped under the old ownership. The club felt stuck. The ambition was gone. The city was waiting for someone to make them believe again. Then the takeover arrived. Fans gathered outside St. James Park. They waved flags, they sang, they celebrated like the future had finally opened. To human rights groups, this was sports watching. To many fans, it was a rescue. Both things can be true at the same time. Football clubs are not normal companies. They are identity. They are memory. They are family. They are the thing passed from father to son, mother to daughter, street to street, city to city. When a sovereign investor buys a football club, it does not just buy a team, it buys emotional territory. That is why sport works. It does not require everyone to support the state. It only needs enough people to connect the state's money with their own happiness. If the team wins, the owner becomes part of the story. If the city feels proud, criticism becomes harder. If politicians attack the money behind the club, fans may hear it as an attack on the club itself. That is not a legal shield, it is a human one. Golf became another example. Saudi Arabia's LIV Golf challenged the PGA Tour by offering huge sums of money to top players. What began as a breakaway league became a fight over the commercial future of the sport itself. The lesson was clear. When the capital is large enough, even old institutions have to negotiate. Sovereign wealth does not need to destroy Western institutions. It can buy into them, sponsor them, reshape them, and force them to adapt around it. At some point, this story becomes too big to understand through one building or one football club, so you have to zoom out. Not Harrods, not The Shard, not Newcastle, not EA, not one airport stake, the whole machine. The major Gulf sovereign wealth funds now control trillions of dollars in assets. Saudi Arabia has PIF. Qatar has the Qatar Investment Authority. Abu Dhabi has ADIA Mubadala and other state-backed investment vehicles. Kuwait has the Kuwait Investment Authority. Together, sovereign wealth funds manage around $5 trillion in assets. That makes them one of the largest pools of patient capital on Earth. Patient capital is important. Normal investors often think in quarters and years. Sovereign wealth funds can think in decades. They can wait. They can absorb losses. They can buy during crises. They can enter industries before they become profitable. They can make investments that are partly financial and partly strategic. Look at where the money is going. Airports, banks, real estate, football clubs, gaming, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, luxury brands, semiconductors, logistics, food security, data centers. These are the systems that modern life depends on. The airport you fly from, the football club your city worships, the game your children play, the electric car industry, the AI infrastructure, and Heathrow shows how literal this can become. Qatar Investment Authority has been a major Heathrow shareholder. and Saudi Arabia's PIF completed the acquisition of an approximately 15% stake in Heathrow's holding company in 2024. The old Gulf economy sold energy to the world. The new Gulf economy wants to own pieces of the world that energy built. And this is the twist. The West spent decades buying oil from the Gulf. Then the Gulf used that money to buy Western assets. Now, as the West tries to move away from the oil, Gulf capital is moving in to some of the industries that are supposed to replace it. Electric vehicles, green hydrogen, solar power, AI data centers. So the energy transition may not remove Gulf influence. It may simply change the form of it. The fuel may change. The influence may remain. Now, to be clear, this does not mean Gulf investment is automatically bad. Many of these investments create jobs. They fund infrastructure, they rescue struggling assets, support industries that Western governments and private investors do not always have the money or patience to build. A new airport terminal still helps travelers. A football club with fresh capital still brings joy to fans. A tech company with long-term investors can still build useful products. The problem is not that foreign money exists. The problem is what happens when state-backed capital becomes too important to refuse.